All right, y'all. Welcome to the Lower Chesapeake Bay Fishing Report, part of the Great Days Outdoors podcast network. I'm your host, Luke Barton, and each week we'll be talking with expert charter guides and subject matter experts about what's happening in our local waters. On this show, we advocate for sustainable fishing practices aimed at keeping this amazing fishery healthy and thriving for generations to come. As the fishing season adjusts to cooler temps, some target species are just heating up. So buckle up for another great episode. Let's jump in and find out what's been biting.
Ho, ho, ho! Santa here with a special message for all my fishing friends at Long Bay Point Bait and Tackle in Virginia Beach. This Black Friday, I'm bringing you a gift you won't find under the tree. It's 20% off all tackle and gear, plus 10 cents off every gallon of fuel. Whether you're after rods, reels, sunglasses, boots, or apparel, we've got just what you need to stay really merry this holiday season. I know you've been good boys and girls this year, so come join the fun, save big, and get those kids excited about fishing. Join us at Long Bay Point Bait and Tackle on Black Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So mark your calendars, come get rigged up, and let's make this holiday season a real adventure. Ho, ho, ho!
Hilton's offshore charts. The days of heading out and blindly looking for good fishing areas are pretty much over. Don't waste time and money on fuel searching for fish. You need the most recent, highest resolution images to not only know where to go, but where not to go. The knowledge provided by today's technology is critical when planning an offshore fishing trip. So make the choice that professional captains all over the East Coast make and choose Hilton's Real-Time Navigator. The easy-to-use interface and excellent customer service will have you on the fish every time you go. Check them out at hiltonsoffshore.com. That's hiltonsoffshore.com. Listen up. AFTCO has a promotional gift for all Great Days Outdoors Podcast Network listeners. They're now offering a camo sunglasses cleaner cloth with any purchase of AFTCO products. For those cold, wet, or windy days, I especially enjoy my weatherproof fabric barricade jacket, as well as my Helm insulated fishing gloves. All you got to do to get your coupon code is text LCBFR to 779-345-2918. You'll get subscribed to our email list, and we'll send you the promo code via email. All right, y'all. Welcome to the Lower Chesapeake Bay Fishing Report, part of the Great Days Outdoors podcast network. I'm your host, Luke Barton, and each week we'll be talking with expert charter guides and subject matter experts about what's happening in our local waters. On this show, we advocate for sustainable fishing practices aimed at keeping this amazing fishery healthy and thriving for generations to come. As the fishing season adjusts to cooler temps, some target species are just heating up. So buckle up for another great episode. Let's jump in and find out what's been biting. All right, guys. Well, it is officially Christmas week. And while we don't have a fishing report for you this week, we've got something that is also very special. I'm excited to talk with Susanna Music with VIMS and learn a little bit more about the Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program. So, Susanna, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be talking with you tonight, Luke. So thanks for the opportunity.
I'm excited as well, too. And I got to give a thanks to Alex with the recent VMRC meeting that we were at. Got a chance to meet him, learn a little bit about his role with the Finfish Committee. And then, of course, he connected us. And now here we are. So to get started, to introduce you to our listeners, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role with VIMS, and kind of what makes you passionate about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So like you, I grew up in the area. I'm originally from Gloucester, Virginia, and at VIMS, I'm a marine scientist there in the Marine Advisory Program, and I lead a variety of research activities in the marine recreational sector. So I work with anglers and charter boat captains in the for-hire industries. And I like to do cooperative applied fisheries research, meaning that I worked hand in hand with both of those groups of folks. And I also serve as a liaison for recreational anglers and scientists to try and develop new research projects too.
That's really cool. And how long have you been in that role? How long have you been doing this?
For this job at VIMS, I started 10 is how I remember it. So yeah, back in 2010.
That's a minute ago, and going back in my memory as a wedding DJ, I can remember just how valuable those dates were, the 10-10-10s. So that's really cool to hear that, and also just understanding how that plays into the ecosystem and ultimately how decisions are made, which we're going to get into all of that stuff. So I'm super excited to have this opportunity to dig in a little deeper. So I guess one of the first questions that I'd have for you is like, kindergarten terms, like what is the Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program and when was it founded or started?
Sure. All right. So before I get in the nitty gritty, I'm going to throw it back at you and I'm going to ask you a question.
All right, I like it.
Okay. I want you to tell me about the first fish that you ever caught that you can remember.
Oh gosh, that is a great question. So I grew up in Hampton. Our family's business is Sam Rust Seafood, and Samuel Rust's daughter was Betty Edmonds, and her husband was my late grandpa, Bobby Edmonds or Paw Paw. And he and my uncle Bruce, when I was like 9, took me down to a pier on Fort Monroe, and we were casting bottom rigs and catching croaker. And the reason I remember catching that first croaker is before I caught that first croaker, I made a cast and hooked my pawpaw. So that was a fun first fish. That was the only fish I caught. That was the only time I went fishing. Interestingly, growing up in a seafood business family, that was the only time I went fishing as a kid. Until fast forward 2012, I moved into a condo on a lake and caught a carp. And once I caught that carp, that's when I was really hooked and got into fishing.
Okay. So if we rewind back to when you were 9, probably at the engineers pier at Fort Monroe,
Hmm.
do you remember what you did with your croaker?
I think we looked at it and then released it back. I don't think we kept it.
Okay. And then what happened with it? Do you know?
I have no clue. I'm assuming it
Eggs.
swam away with
Yeah.
its friends and had a happy afterlife.
All right. Awesome. Perfect. That was just the answer I wanted to hear. So this is where the tagging programs come into the picture. So my tagline is tagging helps us learn where fish go and how they grow. So if you
Ah,
just release a fish without a tag in it, you never get to know what happens to it. But when you tag and release a fish and it's recaptured, you can get to learn all kinds of really cool things about where the fish migrates and if it's recaptured and reported, oftentimes how much the fish has grown and things like that. And that was kind of the premise for the tagging program when it was started back in 1995. It's always been a partnership between the Virginia Saltwater Tournament Office at the Virginia Marine Resources Commission and the Marine Advisory Program at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And back in 1995, the program was started with Claude Baines with the saltwater tournament and my predecessor, John Lucy. And they were chatting and saying, there's not a lot of data out there for red drum in terms of recreational fishing and we should tag some fish. And they're like, you know what? They're not the only species we don't have a lot of data for. And so that's kind of how everything got kicked off. And of course, we couldn't do it without funding from the Virginia Saltwater Recreational Fishing Development Fund, or what most folks know as the Saltwater License Fund.
okay.
And our main premise is to train anglers to tag and release fishes. And so we can learn more about movement and habitat use of fishes in Virginia waters and sometimes even outside Virginia's waters too. And excuse me. So we train volunteers to tag and release fishes, and each fish gets its own tag and number. And then recaptures are tied to that number. So that's how we figure out where the fish has moved to or how much has grown. And then one of the really cool things and what we hear back from our volunteers that they like most about participating is getting the recapture reports. So
Oh yeah.
when the fish is reported as a recapture, the recapture angler gets a report about where it was originally tagged,
Hmm.
but the volunteers also get the same report. So they get to learn what happens to the fish that they tag and release too.
That is so cool. And that is one of my favorite things about, some cobias that I've caught in the past is just getting to, I can't wait. Like I'm excited about the reward, the t-shirt or the pin, but I'm most excited to see like, where did this fish come from? And I want to ask a question about that, but that jogged my memory from when you reminded me, we first met several years ago. I'd caught a cobia that had one of the acoustical tags in it that Kevin Wang was the research scientist on that program, I believe. And I forget the number of days that the fish was out, but it was one of the longer periods of time that had been out, and it was supposed to have been able to capture some ping data for location as well as some water temperature data and water and depth. And so, thinking about your tagline, where do fish go and how much do they grow? I'm just sure that from your perspective as a scientist, you can look at that data that to me probably is like, cool, he was at, 40 feet most of the time, but you're going to probably be able to, draw some lines and connect that to some like really cool, like scientific stuff. So I'm excited to go a little bit deeper. So a question you kind of answered is, that program, it plays a key role in conservation. I'm assuming what would be some of the key data points that the tagging program has provided at a high level that has really helped to guide decision making around conservation?
Sure. So I always like to mention that our program is really cool because it goes full circle. So anglers are buying the fishing license that goes into a pot of money that then goes to fund our program. Anglers are doing the fishing and tagging and reporting of the data, and then our data are analyzed and shared back with the fishing public and anglers through our annual reports. And then I also do a lot of presentations for fishing clubs. And then we also process the data and share it with fishery managers too. And then, I mean, overall, we've tagged more than 420,000 fishes since the program started. And that's
Wow.
pretty phenomenal, not just in terms of absolute effort or numbers of fishes, but we've also had close to 10% of these recaptured, which is really good, especially when we look at our program in comparison to other tagging programs globally.
That's really
And
cool. That's a lot of
yeah,
fish. That's a lot of fish to be tagged.
it is. It's a lot of time on the water.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just doing some rough math here. So 1995, that's 29 years into 420,000. Survey says that's almost 15,000 fish getting tagged a year. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen a pretty steady trend in terms of increase and tagging numbers over time, which is great and which you would certainly anticipate because, the program's got to grow over time in turn, with more participants and more fishes getting tagged and more people recognizing the program and tagged fish. But it's pretty exciting.
That is very exciting. So, for like myself as a recreational angler, or maybe some of our charter guides who have listened, what if we want to get more involved besides, calling in when we catch a tagged fish? What are some of the other avenues or departments within VIMS that we could get involved with as volunteers?
Sure. So for the Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program, the best way you can participate is by joining the program as a volunteer tagger, or like you said, just reporting recaptured fish. And I will talk just for a second about some good things to remember when you get a fish with a tag in it. The first thing is to write down the entire tag number.
Mm,
And sometimes people will report fish that come from other programs. And if we have that number, we can usually help you figure it out, where the original tag came from. You also want to measure and write down the species and its total length. So from tip of the nose to the end of the tail, date, location, and any other information you think would be useful. For our program, you could call the phone number that's on the tag to report the recapture, but the fastest way is usually using our online recapture form. And you can just Google report a tagged fish, Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program, or it's www.vasaltwaterjournal.com and then /report_tagged_fish
Ah, yeah,
dot
I've got it right here.
php. Yeah.
We'll drop that in the show notes for everyone as well too.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you were asking, but if you want to become a volunteer, it's pretty easy. You can just send me an email, which is my email is Susanna, so SUSANNA at VIMS.edu with your contact information. So the name you'd like us to call you or you want in our database, your mailing address, your email address, and your phone number. And you can do that after January and you'll go on our wait list. And
Awesome.
so we have a year-round wait list. You can join it at any time. Our class for next year is actually already full,
Mhm.
but we do fill spots on a first-come, served basis from the wait list.
Very
So if
cool.
if you make it in January, you're most likely to get into the 2026 class if you join that early on.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so in December, we find out how many folks are going to be retiring from the program, and then we fill their spots on a first come, first served basis from that wait list.
That's awesome. And I'm curious, like in all your years of doing this since 10, 10, 10, uh, what's the, I don't even know how to ask the question. I actually have two questions. What's the longest you can remember tag to recapture, period, and then subsequently furthest distance tag to recapture?
Oh, yes. Okay. So the longest we call that days at large. So when a
Okay.
first fish is first tagged and then the last time it was released or recaptured.
Hmm.
And this one's really cool. We had a cobia that was a pretty close runner-up at 9 years, but our longest days at large was a tautog, and it was 3,655 days at large, so more than 10 years. This
Holy
fish,
smokes.
yeah,
Say those
it
number of days again.
yeah, 3,655 days at large.
Oh my goodness. And the tag stayed intact for them to be able to read the
Yes,
numbers and everything.
exactly.
Wow.
So it was tagged March 23rd, 2013 at the Morgan Wreck,
Uh-huh.
and it was 12 and a half inches then. And then it was actually recaptured twice. So the first time it was recaptured again at the Morgan Wreck, and that was about 4 years later, and it was 16 inches. And then last year, March 26th, it was recaptured at Triangle Wreck, which, using that name, it actually could have been the Morgan Wreck, if
Hmm.
because that's part of the same complex. It
Right.
was 22 inches long.
That's
So,
really interesting. Just the fact that it
yes.
was recaptured twice at basically the same wreck. That's, I mean, my brain's going in a hundred directions. Like, did it stay there all year round? Did it create a home there? Did it have a mailing address? Like,
Sure.
how did
Oh,
that
I
fish
think it
stay there?
definitely had a mailing address. And you and I both know, tautog love their structures. So the
Uh-huh.
fact that the tag stayed in all that time for
Right.
a fish that's so structure oriented is really cool.
That is very, very cool. And I'm sure by that time, I'm sure there was some growth on it, whatnot. I feel like that tag should be like memorialized somewhere in like a VIMS Hall of Fame or something. So that's incredible. So 10 years at large, it almost makes me think of like a criminal that's escaped prison. The fish has been at large for 10 years and 13 days. Largest, or excuse me, furthest. So what's the furthest capture after being tagged?
Okay. So, I'll tell you the tag number for this one because it was harvested. It was 27792. You want to guess what species it was, Luke?
Cobia.
Yes, you got it right. Ding, ding, ding. So this cobia was tagged at York Spit, and this was August 8th, 2000. And now we don't know the exact track, of course, because we just use plain old plastic tags. They don't have any electronics in them at all. So we can
Right.
guess that it went along the you know, mid and South Atlantic coast around Florida to the Gulf of Mexico. It was actually recaptured off of an oil rig off Mississippi almost 4 years later. So May 20th, 2004.
That's incredible. I mean, how many? I'm just curious. Let's see here. I'm going to ask the old Google machine, how many nautical miles from York Spit to Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico? You probably already know this answer, don't you?
I don't have Google open, so
Oh,
I'll let you tell me.
let's see here. I can't even. I was trying to do straight line. I mean, that's a long, long ways. That's incredible, and to do it in 4 years. I mean, it almost makes you wonder if there was something like I'm asking a scientist, so I shouldn't try to formalize my own opinion. What do you think would cause a cobia to go that far? Where we got a tog who's hanging out for 10 years in the same wreck, but a cobia that's going to go from way up the bay by York Spit, leave the bay, turn south, and go all the way around the panhandle up through the Gulf of Mexico, and then hang out on an oil rig 130 miles off the coast of Mississippi.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the stories that I used to call my outliers
Okay.
because this fish was really, I mean, it's pretty unusual. Most of our fish, even our cobia, are recaptured back in Virginia. I think it's something close to at least 80% of our cobia that are tagged in Virginia are recaptured back in Virginia. So, some things could be especially warm here or good currents or prey, but the majority of our cobia are recaptured back in Virginia. So this one was just a weird a weird incident, I guess.
A glitch in the matrix, as it were. That's really cool though, just to even hear that the fish could go that far. And I'm curious, in those 4 years, what do you have the data for what size it was when it was captured at York Spit versus what size it was when it was captured off of the coast of Mississippi?
Unfortunately, the recapture angler did not report it, but
Ah,
definitely larger than 40 inches because that fish was harvested.
got it. And that actually brings up a question, and I take responsibility for this too, because, if I've ever been in a cobia tournament or, had somebody on the boat that was super excited about getting a citation, there have been times where we've harvested tagged fish. But thinking about your tagline and the purpose of the tagging program, would you say that, for us, the recreational anglers, should we catch a tagged fish? I'm presuming it would be far better that we go ahead and release that fish than to harvest it.
Yeah, for us it definitely is because that gives us another opportunity to collect data and another opportunity to learn something from that fish. And
Got
I
it.
mean, we're not gonna complain or turn anybody in if they harvest a fish. That's not what we're about. We totally get it. If you get a big old doormat summer flounder, I'm gonna understand why you want to take that fish home and eat it. But
Yeah.
for our research purposes, it's far better if you release our fish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand the doormat flounder, that is definitely a rare catch, but for those 44-inch cobias, those 52-inch cobias, like I told you before we hit the record button, we're really trying to popularize the release over 50 for the cobia. There's a lot of cobias out there. There's a lot of tautog. There's a lot of sea bass. If you catch that tagged fish, just let it go. Let the science keep working. Let them stay at large. Let them go and let them grow, as your tagline says. So, are there any other cool stories about tagged fish that you'd like to share?
Sure. We have done some cooperative research with the help of taggers and other anglers who take something called genetic samples or fin clips. We work with Dr. Jan McDowell at VIM. She runs the genetics program there. And this was back in 2017 or 2018. We we got a recapture of one of our tag cobia from up in Rhode Island, believe it or not.
Wow.
And I looked up the person who recaptured the fish and I contacted him and I'm like, so that's pretty cool that you got one of our tagged fish up there. He's like, oh yeah, I get it 2 or 3 every year in my gill net. He has a special gill net permit. And he was also a volunteer he served in fisheries management roles as, like folks on our FMAC do. And I said, this sounds a little crazy, but would you mind getting a film clip for us? And he's like, no, not at all. So, he not only did he report the recapture of that fish, which is pretty cool that we got a cobia, which,
Mm.
aren't really supposed to, especially at that time, weren't supposed to be that northerly. And he sent us the fin clips. And when the VIMS did the analyses, they were able to find that the cobia that were being captured up in Rhode Island actually shared the same genetic makeup as our Virginia cobia. So that's certainly
Ah,
some food for thought there. Also, pretty crazy that our Virginia cobia are moving up that far north. It gives us some food for thought, right, Luke?
yeah, it sure does. I mean, Rhode Island. I mean, I'm looking on a map here of the Chesapeake Bay and then thinking about Rhode Island. So it's really not that far-fetched if you kind of zoom out and look and think about that one that went from York Spit all the way down around Florida. Rhode Island's not that far of a trip in contrast. And it is. It's very interesting to just think about them, running up and hanging out in Delaware Bay for a little while, and then maybe just outside of New York for a little while, and then all the way up to Rhode Island. In your mind, what could potentially be a cause for a cobia to want to head on north?
Warmer waters,
Yep.
maybe, and how our waters are changing, and patterns of warmer waters changing over time. I think it's going to affect a lot of fishes beyond cobia too. And I
Hmm.
know that the folks listening are probably seeing that themselves too.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's beyond speculation, but probably enough definitive data points to point to things are getting a little warmer. I mean, even thinking about the bluefin tuna that are in right now and the fact that I think it was that El Nino year or whatever it was last year that kind of brought that warm water line, that warm cold line a little bit closer to our shore, and then boom, all of a sudden you've got these jumbo fish that are sometimes a little further offshore, kind of hanging out within reach of your center console boat. So it is kind of interesting to just sit back and observe what's happening. And I really enjoyed that tidbit about the fin clip. So you're talking about literally they're like peck fins. They're cutting little pieces of that off and sending them into you so you can research them for their DNA.
Usually it's the dorsal fin or whatever's going to be, what's going to have the least effect of the fish. So trailing edge of the dorsal fin would probably be
Got
a
it.
little less. And it's tiny. The amount of tissue that we get is like smallest pinky fingernail clipping.
Okay.
So we ask anglers to volunteer by taking a little tiny fin clip and put it in a tube with alcohol in it. And then Jan McDowell's lab takes a look at that at VIMS, and it can help us learn all sorts of cool things about, where fish are hanging out. Are they mixing? Are there separate populations? And things like that. And we're actually to give ourselves a little plug. We're really excited and give another shout out to the Saltwater License Fund because we have a project starting next year to do some more work with gray triggerfish, looking at that
Oh.
stuff using fin clips. So we'll be recruiting gray triggerfish anglers in the new year to help out with that too.
That's really cool to hear. And it's just neat to learn more about the research, the professionals, the scientists like yourself who are all involved in this because it is kind of I'm not going to say easy to forget about, but if somebody's not proactively going out there and doing this and finding this research, then we're not armed with good information for sound conservation decisions. And I think like as technology gets better and, boats get better and gear gets better, I feel like over time the fish stand less and less of a chance. And so we've got to have that good data and that good information so that we can be good stewards of the fishery that's around us and not abuse it or potentially eliminate species for future generations, which is something that we talk about on this show all the time, is just taking individual responsibility as recreational anglers to contribute positively to what's around us instead of negatively. So I'm curious, I want to take a little bit of a dive into some of the actual tools and tags that you guys use. We talk about tags. I know there's acoustical tags. You mentioned the plastic tags, which I think is what most of us see is the orange tags, right?
Yes. So for the Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program, all of our tags in recent years are just bright orange, like blaze orange, and they'll all be in the dorsal fin, so the back of the fish.
Hmm.
And majority of our tags are just like the price tags that you get in your clothes, except of course they have that special orange coating, and each fish gets its own tag number. Most of them are that's our most common tag type. We call them T-bar tags. But for
Okay.
really big fish, like really big red drum, black drum, or cobia, we do use stainless steel dart tags.
Hmm.
And so they're just wire, they have a wire base rather than a plastic one, but they'll still be bright orange. And we've started to trial some plastic dip tart tags in speckled trout as well to see if we can improve our recapture rate for them, hoping that they'll have a little better retention.
Got it. And when you say retention, are you talking about like actually staying in the fish for a period of
Exactly.
time? Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Got it. And I know
exactly.
speckled trout, they have those very soft bodies. So I'm assuming is that part of why you wanted to go for the plastic dart so that's not as damaging to them, but allows it to get a good grip, if you will?
Sure, that's a great way of putting it. And I mean, the other thing that's challenging about speckled trout is that, they grow so much in their first year, basically 11 inches. They are almost fully mature. In
Hmm.
Virginia, Virginia has one of the, in terms of populations of speckled trout, the fastest maturing populations. So in Virginia, you get those dinks in, and then by the end of the year, they're at 11 inches and they're basically mature. But that's a lot of growth to expect a tag to stay in for.
Right. Right.
And so we've tried different things like inserting it in different places or to be a little geeky, where the pterygophores, so that's the bones that are at the T at the base of the dorsal fin spines. That's the
Okay.
name of that bone. So where they're a little closer together, that way the tag tip is less likely to back out. But
Hmm.
we are trialing some different tag types because we would love to have some better recapture rate for those fishes too. I have to say, in all fairness, too, there are other components that can affect our recapture rate, like predation or movement and reporting rate. But, one of the things we can control is trying different tag types. So that's what we're working on right now.
Got it. You said a word there that went right on by me because I'm not a scientist. Predation?
Oh, sure. So meaning, could the speckled trout be being eaten by other fishes or
Got it.
animals?
Got
Yeah.
it. Got it. Okay. I went over here and Googled it too because I was like, what does predaceous mean? And I also love that as a scientist, you still call them dinks because that's what they are when they're those
Oh,
speckled
come
trout
on
aren't
now.
really.
I like to fish too.
Would your insurance cover an air ambulance in a medical emergency? The fact is, insurance doesn't cover the full cost of medical flights, leaving you and your loved ones at financial risk. But with an Air Medcare network membership, you can focus on recovery, not on finances, should the unexpected happen. They take care of everything with no costs for flights, only when flown by one of their providers. Membership covers your full household and starts at $99 a year. Visit gdo.deals/airmedcare to enroll. Pure Flat slick lures are tried, true, and guide approved. Slick lures catch big speckled trout, redfish, flounder, and more. You can cast them a mile, and they produce a highly erratic bait fish imitation with a twitching retrieve. The tournament winning slick has helped many anglers set personal best records. Whether you're fishing the OG slick, the smaller profile slick junior, or the versatile lil slick, one is sure to find that unforgettable thump we're all after. Visit your local tackle retailer or pureflats.com for your favorite color and rigging combination. Go sling some slicks today. You can't catch them on the sofa. Quick aside, what's your favorite fish, your favorite species to target when you go out recreational fishing?
I'm not picky. Oyster toads. That'll be my most likely one to catch, right?
That's awesome. If
No, I mean if I got out more often, I I don't know. I love flounder.
Mm,
Speckled trout are beautiful. I love
yeah,
black sea bass. I think they're really beautiful fish with the turquoise on them.
yeah.
Just, limiting it to our target species for the
Hmm.
tagging program.
Yeah, exactly. They're one of those just almost like a puppy drum when you pull it up and you see that big beautiful blue and purple tail. It's a really cool thing to look at and speckled trout too. And in all of your years of fishing, you mentioned the oyster toad and that being one of your favorites to see come up. And it's cool. We recently talked with Casey Davidson on the show with toadfish, and that's obviously their kind of mascot of oyster toad is their mascot fish on their brand because they like to give back and help to reseed the oyster reefs that keeps that whole ecosystem thriving. So you mentioned these different types of tags and that they vary by species, kind of based on the individual fish and like the hardiness of their makeup or how fast they're growing. I'm curious, you go back to 1995 when the tagging program started. Did those things exist then, or was it kind of just a rudimentary, we've got this one type of tag and you guys figured that stuff out as you went?
That's a really good question. I think maybe there were plastic tip dart tags back then, but maybe not as refined as the ones we have available now. And of course, the T-bar tags are the least expensive, so that's
Mhm.
what we can afford to put in all of our fishes. The dart tags are significantly more expensive, and especially the stainless steel dart tags are pretty pricey. I think they're almost $3 each.
Oh,
So,
wow.
we kind of have to balance it all out with our budget every year
Right.
and, looking at our recapture rates and which ones are good with just a T-bar tag and, for in terms of other species like the speckled trout that have a lower one that might be due to tag retention. Is it better to switch it up and try a different tag type? But aside from that, the process is pretty much the same. And that T-bar is our workhorse tag. We use it for all of our species too.
That's awesome. And this is not meant to be a funny question, but I am curious. I'm sure other people thought of this before too. Like I know with like branding and cattle, like do you think does tagging hurt the fish?
That's a good question. I actually get that asked at every fishing clinic I do with kids or camps and things like that. I can't answer that 100%. I hope not. There are things you can do to minimize the process. It's
Hmm.
extremely fast. It's not like we're doing surgery like you
Right.
would with an acoustic or, something that requires a much bigger anchor point like a pop-off satellite tag.
Mm.
It's extremely quick. So I like to relate it to getting your ears pierced.
Okay. Yeah.
So something that's really quick. And we do spend a lot of time on proper handling and release skills in our tagging class for all of our volunteers. So we hope that helps to minimize any pain in the fishes that we target.
That's awesome. Well, and one fish gets its ear pierced, that data goes upstream to smart scientists like yourself. Great conservation decisions are made, and then all of their cousins get to live, forever into future generations as a result. So that one ear piercing is a small sacrifice to preserve their species. That's what I'm going with, anyways.
Oh, I like it. Well, and you figure you hope it can't be that bad because we do have records of particular individual fish, like a little black sea bass that's been recaptured as many as 13 times. So,
Holy smokes,
yes.
that's
So
crazy.
yeah. So you would think they couldn't have been that scarred by it, to use a human term. It couldn't
Right.
have been that bad if they kept getting recaptured.
Well, and I guess to put it in perspective, getting that little tag popped in for a split second and then getting, carefully released is probably far less traumatic than, the many times that they might get a hook jammed into their lips and yanked up out of the water column very, very quickly.
Exactly. Yes.
So, so kind of thinking about like we've talked through, how it became a program and what the different species are that you guys tag, what the tags actually look like, how they work. I kind of want to understand more of how that data is actually like collected and, put into a database and how do you guys start to interpret that data and ultimately how does it benefit the fisheries management decision making?
Sure. So let's start off because I think it's important by explaining, different kinds of fisheries data that are collected.
Hmm.
And so our data are fisheries dependent, meaning that we're totally reliant upon anglers to go out and report the data back to us, right? And our data are collected and reported randomly. So we can only get data when and if anglers and taggers are fishing, and our data reflect where and when they're fishing. So this is different from something that's fisheries independent, like for
Hmm.
example, the Vinge Trawl Survey, where they have a set number of stations that they get done and set locations every year. It's very controlled, but we don't have a set of stations or a time frame for sampling, and we don't count every single fish that was caught and released by the angler. So that's something that's called whole catch data, and that's also typically part of fisheries independent data sets. So we can learn things like where fish species live in Virginia, our target species live in Virginia, how long they stay here, what size they are, how fast they grow, and where
Hmm.
they go when and if they leave Virginia. So that's talking about the kind of data that we collect and some basic background on that.
Hmm.
Some of the cool things that we can learn, the VMRC regularly uses our data. So I should say the Virginia Marine Resources Commission,
Hmm.
they have to provide something called compliance reports. And pretty much every year they use our data for our red drum, tautog, black sea bass, and summer flounder for those compliance reports. I think that's something that's really cool is we've been part of the Southeast Data Assessment and Review. Back in 2018, we were part of the stock identification team. So they used our data to help identify new boundaries for stock management because previously cobia were all grouped together in the Gulf and Atlantic.
Mm.
And when they pulled together our data in addition to other tagging programs data up and down the East Coast, they were able to figure out that we probably needed to divvy up the stock a little better. So now there's an imaginary line at the Florida Georgia border, right?
Hmm.
And so those fish south of the Florida Georgia line are managed along with the Gulf, and then we have the fish north of that that are managed separately. And that's sort of the result of many teams of people, which included our tagging data and other tagging programs, looking at that and putting it together to try and figure out what's the best way to manage these stocks.
That's really cool. So that's a great example of how if we didn't have this data coming in from these folks, we wouldn't have been able to gather enough information to go, okay, if we've got to put a line and segregate the management and the stocks, if you will, where are we going to put it? It would have just been a wild guess. Whereas now with this data, you're able to be a lot more accurate and kind of prescribe that line, so to speak, based on good information that you've got along the ways, have there been any like surprising decisions that have been the catalyst was the data that was collected?
Um, I mean, that might have surprised some people,
Hmm.
but I think the nice thing is we have a great group of people who do that all work on these tagging programs up and down the East Coast, and we work well together and we share data whenever we can.
Hmm.
And I think when we pulled our data together, like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Looking at the clusters that came out of putting the data together, and that was kind of surprising to say, oh yeah, there's actually some good evidence here, especially when you combine it with something like the genetics data to say, yeah, these fishes probably need to be managed differently, or maybe there are some subpopulations, or, these fish are sticking together in different groups. And so that should be brought into consideration when they're, trying to make the management decisions. And of course, as anglers, that really impacts us,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier that kind of piqued my curiosity. So you talked about the fin clips and how that data or that DNA was similar to that of Virginia cobia. This might be a very ignoramus question, but how might DNA differ for the same species, but from different states or different areas?
Yeah, sure. I'm certainly not a geneticist, Luke, so I will defer to my wonderful colleague for the specifics on that. But there are a lot more tools available besides just fin clips. They can
Right.
actually take water samples and look at something called environmental DNA. So all the gunk that gets left in the water when a fish swims through it. And
Hmm.
there's all these cool technologies to figure out where fish are hanging out.
Hmm.
But more importantly, so say if fish in Virginia up to Georgia, or sorry, Rhode Island, fish in Virginia, all the way up to Rhode Island are breeding together,
Hmm.
then and only amongst themselves, then they could be genetically different from fish down in Florida or
Ah,
Georgia or South Carolina. And if you're divvying up things, it's probably more likely North Carolina up to Rhode Island. Maybe
yep.
those fish are just the ones that are hanging out and breeding and there may be a little subgroup there. So that's one example. It's, which fish groups are breeding with each other
Yeah,
that can play out into the fin clips and the genetics.
that makes sense. And I've actually had the pleasure of obviously catching several cobias here in the Virginia Beach area. I've also been down to Dolphin Island, Alabama, and shot out of there and caught some cobias off of the anchored ships near the mouth of Mobile Bay. And there are some visibly like mild differences between the two, but the biggest difference I would say between the two fish was the one down there in the south. When I got it out of the water, it was like, "How you doing?" Had a real deep Southern accent to it.
Oh,
That's my
oh,
bad
that
joke
was
for the
bad.
evening.
Oh, that
But
was bad.
so that kind of segues from a bad joke into hopefully a good question. Of all the species that you guys tag, what would you say is the most commonly tagged fish, and why?
So our top tag species cumulatively changed about 6 years ago. So back in the day when I first started, it was definitely summer flounder, but in more recent years, it's been speckled trout. And we've had
Hmm.
more than 155,000 speckled trout tags since the program started in 1995. And
Wow.
I would say part of that is because, they're what's around, right?
Hmm.
And summer flounder aren't as easy to catch as they used to be. So speckled trout are more easily accessible, especially for our taggers who are more inshore based.
Hmm.
And same for reporting recaptures too.
Okay. That's very cool. It's neat to understand that. And that's, I mean, goodness, that's almost 35% of the totality of the tagged fish since the program's inception. So that's a huge percentage of the total tagging that you guys have done. And then if you were to forecast into the future, 5 years from now, do you anticipate that'll be the same or likely change due to any number of circumstances?
Sure. At this point, I'm not really sure. It's all dependent. I think environmental factors have a huge influence, and
Hmm.
this has changed even since I started back on 10-10-10. When I was growing up, I don't know if you remember this, but I don't remember there being that many what a lot of people call red tides or, the
Mm.
big swashes of red and brown water. So there are algal blooms. And last year was pretty good. We didn't really have that many. But what happens when you get these big blooms of algae in the water or dirty water, some people call it, that's driven by runoff and all nutrients and stuff getting washed in the water. So that you get these big black, blooms of algae. They feed off those nutrients and then they die and sink down in the water column. And when that happens, it kind of sucks the oxygen out. And that can really influence the amount of really good habitat in terms of like oxygen in the water for the
Uh,
fish that we target. And when you have things like more rain or more nutrients going in the water, then it's more, and wind too,
mhm.
amount of wind that can do things like turn the water over, circulate the water, all these environmental factors that some of which we control or influence by deciding to put fertilizer on our lawns or
Ah,
not. And you know what I mean?
yep, yep.
They can really have an impact on water quality and, that impacts our fish too. So, if you have a big algal event or a big bloom, and then all of a sudden you notice even while it's happening. If you fish, you will watch fish and they will not go into the bloom. They'll probably stay along the edge. We
Hmm.
call that the edge effect because the water quality is better there.
Yep.
And after a bloom's been through, and we've had this, we have an advisory group, and this is what our anglers have told us is, after algal bloom's been there, it's very unlikely that we'll get fish returning to the area for at least 2 or 3 days, probably longer. So
Wow.
these events and all these environmental factors are playing out in the fish that we target. And I think that's part of the reason why we've had lower numbers of summer flounder.
Mm.
And our top tagging location for summer flounder was actually just down the road from my office at the Gloucester Point Fishing Pier.
Ah,
And the numbers have really gone down there, and that's because they're probably more likely to be affected by that. And then also warmer waters. Fish
mhm.
don't like to be hot, so they're gonna, and there's less oxygen in the water when it's hot, so they're gonna move where they can breathe, right?
Yep, yep.
All
They're
these
not too
things,
unlike us.
yes, all these things are going to be impacting, our target species in the bay over the next few years, and hopefully the we have another year like we did last year with not too many blooms
Yeah,
and maybe water quality will improve and we'll get some more summer flounder in. But aside from that, my guess it's probably going to play out to be pretty similar, where we get similar numbers of our target species
that's really
being tagged.
cool
Yeah.
cool to hear. And I'm hearing you talk about the algo blooms, and I would say this to anybody that's listening. Take a look down your street. I live in Virginia Beach, not too far from the western branch of the Lynnhaven River. And if I go outside across the street and look at my storm drain, it says right on the storm drain where it feeds to, the Lynnhaven River. So, to anyone listening, go take a look at your storm drain and just consider where your runoff is going when you make decisions like fertilizer and this, that, and the other. Like, sure, some weeds in your grass, yeah, they're not the prettiest thing in the world. Maybe go pick them instead of dumping a whole bunch of fertilizer on it. Something to think about as you make those decisions and kind of connect the dots of how they play into the bigger ecosystem. And just zooming out, looking at the Hampton Roads area as a whole, which was once called tidewater because of all the tidal water. Those little veins of water are into all the areas around here. So there's so much, I don't know what the right word is, civilization surrounding all these waterways that play a part of that ecosystem, then ultimately downstream, touches the fish. So it's cool to just learn about that.
Exactly. And, I think maybe the word you're looking for is development.
Hmm.
And it's unfortunately part of that a lot. That goes along with it a lot of times is chopping trees down and pulling, plants out of the ground. And of course, that increases erosion. So, more soil in the water, more turbidity, more filling in of these tributaries, which isn't good for folks that like to boat and fish. And it's not good for water quality or, people who are sight fishing, things like that. The clearer the water it is, the better. So, another great example of another environmental factor that plays into our good fishing.
Tired of battling salt corrosion on your boat, trailer, and reels? Meet Salt's Gone, your ultimate solution. This powerful, instantly acting chelating agent tackles salt and brine with ease, featuring corrosion inhibitors to protect against future damage and surfactants for a thorough clean. Salt's Gone is pH neutral, making it safe for all boat materials metal, glass, paint, vinyl wraps, and more. Highly concentrated, just 1 gallon creates 100 gallons of ready to use solution. Apply it with or without running water. It's perfect for any situation. Use code GreatDays10 to save 10% at saltsgone.com. Or if you need faster delivery, use Amazon or your favorite retailer. Sam Rust Seafood, your locally trusted source for premium wholesale seafood. Servicing customers from Hampton Roads down through the Outer Banks, Richmond, and surrounding areas, including Fredericksburg, Charlottesville, and Lynchburg, for over 80 years. Committed to the highest standards in the industry, Sam Rust distributes the best of the ocean directly to your restaurant, hotel, or grocery store on time and at a great price. Visit samrust.com to discover how quality, tradition, and sustainability come together. So don't cuss, call Sam Rust. So this program has obviously gone through many changes over the years as, funding has come and gone or different new tools and the like. Here it is 2024, almost what, 30 years since its inception. In today's world, what are some of the hurdles that your program is facing? Any sort of limitations, whether that's technical, participation? What are some of the things that are currently challenges that you guys face at VIMS?
I would say for the Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program, we've been really, really, really lucky. We've been supported since the beginning from the Virginia Saltwater Recreational Fishing Development Fund or the Saltwater License Fund. Of course, that varies from year to year depending on how many people buy the licenses or if the government has to use those funds for other things like enforcement or other projects or internal funding. So, we've been really lucky, especially in recent years, that we have a steady source of funding there. We do have matching funds from VIMS too. So that's always kind of in the back of my mind is, how good is the state of that fund going to be?
Hmm.
And, we've been really lucky in terms of participation. So our participation has been steady. Our taggers are usually our own best advertising.
Hmm.
Many of them are great at ambassadors for the program. This is how you got in touch with me, right?
Yep,
Is
absolutely.
because of Captain Alex Perez. So,
Yep.
and we're very lucky to have a great group of people who participate in the program. But, with our budget, we are limited to 200 volunteers because of our staff. And, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, Luke, because
Mm.
unlike other programs, have the opportunity being on the smaller side to get to know our volunteers personally. And we really like this. I mean, I love it. I know Ann Burnett at the VMRC knows folks as well. And we enjoy having the opportunity to get to know these anglers over time and answer questions and get to know where they fish and what they're targeting and get to know them as people. So I think that really helps them to stay with the program, which is an awesome thing too. So I think we're pretty lucky overall.
Good. That's really encouraging to hear because it is such an important part of the ecosystem to have this in place, in my opinion. And then thinking into the future, are there any new advancements or technologies? We touched briefly on the acoustical tagging. Is there anything in the pipeline that you guys are excited about and hopeful for in the future in terms of new technology or things that you might be able to implement?
Sure. I would say right now, if you go to report a recapture or you're even entering your data as a tagger, we have very long list of location names. And my goal has been for a while now to kind of improve this. So we keep our taggers' private fishing location information private.
Hmm.
However, most people, you're going to say Anglo-American Wreck or Fort Monroe, you're going to know where that is. That's not
Hmm.
really a secret spot, right?
Right.
But there are new advances in terms of how location data are reported in other tagging programs and GIS systems, like using different size squares and with the location, the lat long behind those squares. So you would say now instead of having to pick a name from a long list, you could have a map and you could say, oh, yeah, it's closest to that dot,
Ah,
or we caught it within this 1 mile square. You see what I'm going? And
yeah.
then on the back side of that, that lets us do a lot more on the spatial side of analyzing the data than we can do right now with just a location name. So on the back side of things, I go in and I hand label everything, all the locations for fisheries managers. But in the future, it would be really nice to kind of upgrade that into a better GIS platform for fishery managers and just to be able to do more things and make our data more useful.
That's really cool. And I'm picturing in my technological brain somehow into the future with like Active Captain and some of these other popular platforms where maybe there would be some sort of a plug-in where we could just simply, press a special kind of man overboard if we captured a tagged fish that would then, feed into your system somehow to where it'd be cool to just picture being able to zoom out and see all these dots on a plotter and just kind of start to imagine these different dots, different colors, meaning different species, and just get to dream up why they're going in that direction or this direction, or staying in their wreck, like that tautog that stayed out there for 10 years. I feel like we have gotten such an incredible download of information about how this program came to be, why it exists, the functional things that it does to create and capture data, the purpose of that data, how it's practically applied, things that we can be more mindful of in the environmental factors as recreational anglers, and even just as folks like in the development stuff, like you mentioned. Of all the things that we've discussed, if there's one kind of key takeaway that you would like for the listeners to have about the Virginia tagging program, what would it be?
I would say thank you. So, I mean, I would say thank you to all of the anglers who have bought saltwater fishing licenses for the past 30 years. Thank you for making the program possible. Thank you to anglers for reporting our tagged fish. Thanks for releasing the fish. And most of all, thanks to our taggers who have been tagging fish and taking time out of their fishing to pause and tag and release fish and report their data. I've learned so much. That's one of the things that I love most about my job is getting to learn from anglers, and it's been a pleasure. So I think that's the best thing is getting to, help the resource by collecting this data, but it's really driven by the anglers who are certainly going back into helping manage this resource.
That's awesome. I would say that's a great takeaway and great inspiration to continue doing the same thing that all those volunteers have been doing. And I would say the same to you. Thank you for the passion that you put into this. And I should have asked this question very early on. You asked me about my first fish. When did you first discover your passion for marine biology and marine science? Like, what got the bug going to get into this in the first place for you?
I was feral. I don't know, going into the marsh without any flip-flops on, getting stuck, crabbing with chicken necks off the dock, getting lost in the canoe, all that good stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. You said you grew up in Gloucester, so there was definitely lots of opportunity for that with all of that surrounding area. What a cool mental picture there. I just, thought about you
Sorry,
wandering
Luke.
off into a marsh and like, I've got something between my toes. You know what? I think I'd like to start studying this. That's really cool. Suzanne, I can't thank you enough for your time and your knowledge and just sharing and answering questions. Folks that are listening that want to either follow along and learn more or get in contact with you, what's the best place that they can, pay attention to what's going on with VIMS, and what's the best way they can get in contact with you?
Sure. So at VIMS, if you go to our main website, and you probably want to look under the Batten School for Coastal and Marine Sciences in VIMS,
Hmm.
or it's www.vims.edu is a great way to learn more about what's happening at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. But for the tagging program, the best place to start is our website, which is www.vims.edu/ VGFTP / or you can just Google Virginia Game Fish Tagging Program. And we also have a pretty active Facebook page, and that's just at VA Game Fish Tagging. So VA Game Fish Tagging, all lowercase, one word. And that's a great place to check out what our folks are targeting, what fish they're catching, not necessarily where, Luke. But
we can't give away all the secrets.
No, I can't. We look after our folks because they do a great job for us. So, although most of them would be happy to share where they're catching their fish, but we love our taggers, and so they send us good pictures of well-handled fish. So that means fish held horizontally, no fingers in the gills. We would love to post those pictures. So check out our Facebook page too.
Absolutely. I'll drop all of that in the show notes. And I'm so glad you made that mention about proper fish handling. You see the different comments on Facebook about it all the time. So I just want to hear you say it one more time, whether it's a large fish or a small fish. Talk us through the importance of proper fish handling and release.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this is a really big thing, and people will be the worst trolls imaginable, as I have learned. So, okay, the most important thing, Luke, for any species of fish is time. Try to minimize the time the fish spends out of water. That's more important than anything else. There are a lot of folks who do research with anglers to figure out this stuff, and across the board for all the researchers, that's the biggest component. Minimize the amount of time the fish has been out of the water. Next thing is keep the fish wet. Wet hands, if you're going to put the fish down to measure it, make sure your measuring board is wet. If you're going to handle the fish with anything other than bare hands, make sure it's wet. So wet towel or wet gloves. You want to make sure that you try to keep the fish horizontal. So if you're moving it in and over the gunnel, if you're in a boat or the rail, try to keep the fish horizontal because, I mean, you don't want to be hung up, but imagine having something stuck in your lip and being held, vertically. It would not be good. And I mean, if you think about it, a fish is designed to be horizontal, right?
Right.
So if you're holding them by their mouth vertically, it's not how their guts and everything else was designed to be positioned.
Right. That's a great point.
And if you're going to release your fish, I would say don't gaff it. Don't touch the gills, don't poke it in the eye, all the basic stuff. And gentle release head first in the water, not necessarily launching it. I don't believe in that. It's not a football toss. That's not a good thing.
Right.
Gently head first in the water, cradle the tail until it's able to swim out of your hand itself is a good thing.
Got it. And for these larger species and like specifically ones that they do seem to have a higher chance of mortality, the big red drum, the cobia, a lot of times, I'm really fond of Captain Zach Hoffman, who, consistently is displaying how to, use the fish grips on a rope to keep that fish swimming behind the boat until it's fully revived. What's some of those best practices we can use for some of those larger fish in addition to what you just shared?
I actually think more of the same, really. So
Okay.
if you're going to handle it, if you're going to take a picture, if it's a really big fish, you're probably going to have to hold it against your chest, right? So if you can, make sure whatever is touching the fish, so be it your chest or your arms, make sure it's wet.
Got it.
And most importantly, minimize the amount of time the fish is out of the water. In the summertime, especially when the water is hot, that really increases the risk of mortality for the fish. So if you don't have to take the fish out of the water at all, that's the best scenario. Leave the fish in the water whenever you can. If you know you're going to release it, have a plan. Say, have everything ready to go. So you're not, running around trying to find where your net is, where your pliers are, where your measuring tape is, have it ready to go. So you have your plan, know your regulations too before you go out. So you're not like, oh crap, I got this fish. Is it big enough to keep? Are we keeping this? Hey, Bob, are we keeping the flounder today? No? Okay.
Oops.
Have your plan. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Have your plan ready to go. These are all things you can do to minimize catch and release mortality and increase the survivorship or the likelihood that fish is going to go on to swim away another day.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I would say, like, the way that I receive that information as a recreational angler is just to kind of absorb it and then to think about it and go, okay, I've got to take some personal responsibility here to, I've done all these other things for my checklist for the day to make sure I got the right, tackle, rods and reels, ice, maybe some cold beers or whatever. That's all great. But to also have a plan for if I catch a fish I'm not going to harvest, what can I do to proactively minimize the amount of time they're out of the water? Can we throw a number on it? Like what's a good time frame to have them out of the water and back in, and what's a bad time frame to have them out of the water?
Sure. It really depends on the species. Some like speckled trout and they're puny fish for really, right? So you
Mhm.
don't want to leave them out. You don't want them to get dried out. Cobia actually tend to be a little hardier a
Mhm.
lot of cases, but I would say there's no hard and fast rule. A lot of people, my colleagues who focus on improving release mortality, say as soon as you could lift the fish out of the water, take a big gulp of air yourself and hold your breath
Got it.
and try to get the fish back in the water by the time you need to take another breath. That's
Got
going to
it.
be really hard, I know, but I think it's a great way to, it's a good challenge. Keep that in mind. It
There's gonna
makes
be
you think about what you do anyway.
bunch of guys passing out trying to take pictures this summer because of this.
Well, it'll make
I'm
them think
kidding.
about it, right?
No,
No, hopefully, yeah, we don't want anybody passing out, but
no, that's
um,
absolutely right. That's a great rule of thumb. And, one of the things I love about like Captain Austin Hain, for example, sometimes when you get in these school of red drum, you do get a lot hooked up at a time. And he's got one of these gigantic nets that can hold like 5 or 6. So whenever he's, captured more than one or two, he's keeping them in the net, keeping them in the water, and then getting everybody ready. Okay, here we go. Picture time. Boom, boom, boom. And then those fish are right back in the water. So, like you talked about, having a plan of action. If you don't have a net that big, maybe you shouldn't be catching 5 at a time. Just think through it and do the responsible thing with, treating the fish as you want to be treated, which is to live most of the time, unless the plan is, of course, to harvest that fish legally. So again, Susanna, I am just so grateful for the time together and getting to learn all about the game fish tagging program. Any final thoughts or topics that you want to cover before we wrap up?
I think that's it. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great holiday. And thank you to all of your listeners as well, and all of our volunteers and the anglers who have contributed to the tagging program.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susanna. Guys, that's going to wrap up a really cool segment talking about all things tagging, the data, the purpose, and everything in between. And of course, some great tidbits about proper fish handling to make sure that these fish can, like Susanna said, get tagged and then go and grow. Guys, have a very, very Merry Christmas, and we look forward to talking to you soon. It's time we talked about catching some serious savings. Imagine harnessing the power of the sun to cut your energy bills and having a roof that's built to last. Convert Solar and Roofing specializes in top-notch solar installations and durable roofing solutions that stand up to the toughest elements. Their solar panels are designed to maximize efficiency, and their roofs are built with premium materials to ensure long-lasting protection. Whether you're out on the water or at home, their expert team ensures you're covered. As fellow anglers in the Lower Chesapeake Bay, the team at Convert Solar and Roofing cares about both sustainable living and sustainable fishing. So reel in those savings today and visit www.convert-solar.com or call 757-44-SOLAR. Make your energy and roof as reliable as your favorite fishing lure. Call Convert Solar and Roofing today. So that's going to wrap it up this week. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, to get your free AFTCO Camo Sunglasses Cleaning Cloth, just text the acronym LCBFR to 779-345-2918 to get your promo code and be added to our email list so we can send you the new show each week. You guys keep whacking them and be safe out there.